My name is Mrs. Velasco, Maggie Velasco. Some of you, how many tutors do I have in here? Do I have any of my peer tutors in here? Oh, okay. So you might have seen me lurking around a little bit. I'm also the advisor of our peer tutor program, and I've been in subbing for Mr. Merseth and Mr. Cottsmith and Mrs. Rusk. So maybe you've seen me kind of lurking around a little bit the school. You're all, like Ms. Rusk said, very smart. The best you can do for ACT for anything, whether it's soccer, football, music, anything, is preparing, right? So coming here and having the opportunity to learn about the ACT, have some time to practice, see what it looks like, that is your best defense for doing the best you possibly can on the ACT exam. I do, however, want to make a little bit of a disclaimer. By attending today, you are here to get information, to have some time to practice, to be more knowledgeable about this big test that's out there nationally. But I cannot guarantee that you're all going to leave here ready to get a 36, okay, or even a 34. I can't guarantee that you're going to get a specific score. I can guarantee that you will leave with more knowledge, but not necessarily enough to get a 36 or a 35. So little disclaimer there. I do also want to point out, remember that the ACT is not who you are. So when you go and you create your college applications, you take your ACT once, twice, 5 times, whatever you decide, that is not a picture of who you are. Remember, your college application is much, much more than this standardized test. So when you go in to take this exam, work on that anxiety, lower that level, okay? You are much, much more than just this test, okay? So that is my disclaimer. Here's what our time together is going to look like. It's going to go by fast because it's going to be really sectioned out. I'm going to start with some just general testing information. If you come to the other ACT sessions, you might see that same general testing information again, so just be aware of that. We're going to go into some math-specific section information. We're actually going to do a timed practice and grading. So you're going to get a 15-minute, 15-question test that we are going to time, you're going to take, you're going to grade it, and then we're going to see what that score would be as an actual estimated ACT exam score. So you will leave with that. I'll take some time for individual questions, walking around. If there are some questions you hit that's like, why is it not D? We can talk about that. And then you'll leave with a link to this presentation as well as a link to a full practice exam. Okay, so to cut down on some paper, I've got the links there on the back of your practice exam that we're going to do. So you will get to take that with you. The biggest improvement you can make is usually between that first time you take the ACT and the second time you can take the ACT. Okay, that preparing in between, I should say, based on what preparing you do in between. So getting this information now and taking it for the first time, how many juniors do we have in here? All right, so April 2nd. If you haven't signed up yet, make sure you do that in the Student Success Center. You're doing that here, April 2nd, taking the ACT. But in between that first and that second test date gives you a chance to really understand what are the areas of improvement. So you're doing what you can right now before you take it the first time. You'll get some targeted answers and you'll have a chance to then get some targeted help on different sections. So here's some general testing information as you go to take this test. It is 4 sections, all multiple choice, and it's in this order. You will start with English, then you go to mathematics, which you get a calculator on. So TI 83, 84, be aware of what your calculator is. There are guidelines. If it's a Casio and you want to talk to me about it afterwards, just let me know. Then it goes into reading and finishes with science. Science is non-calculator, and that shouldn't freak you out. Science is a lot of learning how to read graphs. Okay, you're given information, you're given tables, you're given graphs, and then they ask you questions based on it. So you don't necessarily have a lot of computation that's happening in that science section. Your English section, there are 75 questions, and you have 45 minutes to complete those. Okay, if you think about that, it's less than a minute per question. Not scary, but you just have to think about pacing yourself. Math has 60 questions and you get 60 minutes. So you're about averaging a minute per question if you think about it. Math is usually the section that people run out of time on. So if you do run out of time, it's okay. It's not a bad thing. That's common. Reading has 40 questions, and so does science, and then both of those are 35 minutes. So again, you've got to average a little less than a minute per each question. There is an optional writing section. I do not know if they're offering the writing section here on April 2nd, But something you want to check into is some colleges will accept it or even require that you take that writing section. So if you're thinking about, where you want to go in the next couple years, double check and see if they require the writing section score. But that is an optional piece. It is one essay question, and then you have 40 minutes to cover it. So in our ACT prep sessions leading up to April, we're not going to cover the writing, but there are some resources I can give you if you would like to look into that writing piece. But check into your college and see if it's a requirement that they have for admissions. General testing information. Get familiar with the test, which you're all here to do. So step 1, check. Update your knowledge and review your skills. Raise your hand if you are in at least advanced algebra. Maybe you're in pre-calc, maybe you're in something AP. Okay, you have hit all the material that will show up on the math section by going through advanced algebra. So you might need to spend less of your time focusing on what you're currently doing in pre-calc or calculus and going back and saying, oh, what did I do in pre-algebra? What did I do in algebra? Geometry, I think I need to review that class. So you've actually covered all of the material that's going to show up on that math section. Study content areas you're not familiar with. Think about your resources. Okay? Utilize your teachers here. They are fabulous teachers here at BHS. So use your resources. Find those free resources. Always the best. Pace yourself and read the questions carefully. We're going to actually talk about reading those questions carefully because math, they love to throw in a couple little tricky things. Not necessarily content, but how they word the question and how the answers are stated. And then answer every question. Okay, there's no penalty for guessing. So as you're checking your time and you're going through and you're saying, okay, I'm at question 20, spent about 20 minutes, I'm on pace. You start to get to question 50 and you've got about 2 minutes left. You want to think about maybe guessing for those last 5 and filling in some bubbles because there is no penalty for guessing. Okay, never leave a question blank, no matter what. Never leave a question blank. General scoring information, it does change. Every time the ACT is given, the rubric is adjusted and changed because if you notice, you have 75 English questions, 60 math questions, 40 science, but yet you get the score that's out of 36. So what happens is the rubrics for grading are completed for each test, each little sub-score. And within that sub-score, it's scored out of 36. So you're going to see when you get your results back, it will say out of 36 for math, out of 36 for English. And then what happens is they're going to take an average of those 4 sub-scores. So equally weighted, not one section is worth more than another section. Might be more questions, but not necessarily worth more. They'll average those 4 together, and then that writing score is calculated totally separately. So remember, that's that optional section that you're going to check into your college, see if they require it. So let's talk about the nitty-gritty of the math section. We're going to look at some material. I'm going to have you talk to the people around you. We're going to look at some different questions. What do you notice? And then, like I said, we're going to do some timed practice in about 10 minutes and get an estimated math section ACT sub-score. So test information, we said 60 questions at 60 minutes. So if you think about averaging about a minute, one good thing is to just try on your phone, what's a minute look like? Okay, it seems like it's not a lot of time, but when you actually set a minute timer on your phone, if you're doing like a plank or you're running, seems like a lot of time. So practice, see what that time feels like. It covers material through pre-calculus, but there are only 4 questions on trigonometry. So your sines, your cosines, your tangents, there's only 4 questions. If you think about 60 of them, that pre-calculus material shows up 4 times. Number and quantity, that's going to be like your pre-algebra stuff, just computational things. Algebra, functions, geometry is a big section. Stats and probability, which you probably found in your advanced algebra class. That kind of stats and probability, not necessarily AP stats or AP probability. And then integrating essential skills, so kind of a mix and some modelings in there too. You do get to use a calculator on the test, and then just make sure that calculator is allowed. I always say a TI-83, 84 is really the best. You can also go into this test with a calculator that only does adding, subtracting, dividing, multiplying, square root. That's where you're going to spend most of your time anyway. So if you can't get your hands on a graphing calculator, do not fret. Okay, don't worry. Just get a regular computational calculator, one you can buy for $5 at the dollar store or $1 at the dollar store. and take that in with you. Okay, that's really all you're going to need. It does start easier and moves to more difficult problems. So just be aware of that too as you're kind of pacing yourself. The first half, 1 through 30, are going to be kind of your easier questions. Not different material, but just easier questions, and then it will get more difficult as you get to the end. So that's why we usually run out of time and get those guessing towards those last problems. So if you feel like it's getting harder, it is. That's how they structure it. So let's talk some tips, tricks, and we'll do some example problems. Take a second, read this question. Calculate it if you've got a way to do that, your answer. Turn to the person next to you. What do you notice about this question right away? How many people noticed this statement? Yards. But it's in feet. So ACT loves to do this in the math section. They give you information. It's in a certain increment, but then your answer is not in that same increment. But guess what's hidden in those answers? The one related to feet. So they love to do that. You got to take some time and really look at how are they asking this question? What should my answer be in? We've got 15 feet by 21 feet, but yet they're asking me square yards. So the two most common answers, if you think about what your answer was, two most common were B and D. B, you change to yards first, and then you find square yardage by just doing length times width. D, we find the square footage, so 15 times 21, and then divide by 3, because most people say, oh, 3 feet in a yard. However, B is the correct answer because we want to change those increments first and then do our calculations. So you'd be surprised how many of these little problems pop up with these increment measurement pieces. So as you hit those problems, think about what's my answer supposed to be in, make the change first, and then do your calculations. We're going to try an example question, geometry. This time I'm going to time it so you can see what it feels like to have 1 minute on the timer. All right, and this is geometry. We're going back to geometry. All right, so 2 things, geometry material, and then to see what it feels like to have 1 minute per question. Ready? Here we go. That's 30 seconds. Ten left. So that's a minute, okay? Seems longer than when you say you only have a minute, right? Stop that. So turn to the person next to you. Tell them the answer. What'd you get? What do you think? Tell them how you felt about that minute. Was it never ending or was it too quick? Maybe wager some cookies or a can of pop. All right, answer D. Going back to our geometry skills, maybe a little SOHCAHTOA with your angles. We've got tangent, so vocabulary words, just remembering what those mean. That's part of that reviewing, is coming up with what does tangent mean? Opposite side divided by adjacent side. Knowing that this point is xy, but that's also length and height, x and y. Okay, so that comes with the reviewing piece. Let's try another one. Essential skills. So this is that just integrating skills. It may be algebra, maybe geometry. It's just kind of mixed in. So I'm going to do another timer for a minute. Here we go. 30 seconds. Ten seconds. There we go. So maybe that minute felt a little bit faster because of the material, because of the question. Don't be afraid, be vulnerable. How many people read this question and went, what? Yeah, yep, it's okay. That's part of why I'm here. Looking at the information that is stated, you maybe looked at this and said, oh my gosh, I don't even know where to start. So your task is then to look at what are some vocabulary words? What can I pull out? What can I pick apart to make an educated guess? Can I get it down to 2 answers? And I am 50-50 on whether I get this question right. So one thing that you could pull out is prime. Remember your prime numbers from way, way back. Anything that is divisible by itself and 1 only. So if I look at my answers, that eliminates A is no longer a possibility. 10 is not a prime. B is not a possibility. 30 is not a prime. What else do I have? And C is not, or D is not a possibility because 10 is not a prime. Now I'm down to it's either C or E, and all I'm going to do is grab my calculator and multiply. I'm going to figure out which one actually multiplies to 30,030. And maybe that's the tactic you use going through this problem. But you do not need to know 100% of the material going in. Okay? There are ways that you can circumvent knowing the material and knowing that vocabulary and making really educated guesses. Because remember, try the problem first, do as best as you can, and if you get stuck, guess. Make an educated guess. There is no penalty for guessing on any part of the ACT. The answer is there somewhere. Remember, it has to be one of those 4 or 5, so it is there. Before we try our testing here, just some other tips and tricks. With your calculator, make sure it's in radian and function modes. So if you hit mode and you have that list, you can see we want to be in radian over degree, and we want to be in function over recursive, sequence, anything else, polar. You want to make sure it's in those 2 functions. You will spend most of the time on just the basic computation screen, just adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing. But if you see a problem, you hit those trig ones, cosine pops up, sine pops up. More than likely it needs to be in radian. You can switch it to degree if necessary. Don't be afraid to graph. Okay, graphing is a great function. If you've got that on your calculator, you've got a graphing calculator and you have no idea, but they give you a y equals something, plug it into your calculator, graph it, make an educated guess based on what's listed in the answers. The one that I love the most is math frac. It turns any decimal into a fraction. If possible, it turns any decimal into a fraction. A lot of times you'll get it, you'll look at the answers, they're all fractions, and fractions mean freak out. Everybody freaks out with fractions. Do your computation, come up with an answer in decimal, change it to a fraction and find your answer listed there. Okay? Don't let fractions freak you out. All right, here is our timed practice. So I'm going to pass these out face down, because I'll actually hit the timer for 15 minutes, face down. You got 15 questions. Remember that we talked about that's about a minute a question when it's 60 questions, 60 minutes. So I'm going to give you a full 15. If you finish prior to that 15, just keep in the back of your mind that you would have that time to apply to later questions. Remember, it does get a little bit more difficult. I did pull a good mix of beginning ACT practice towards the end of the math practice. So this is a good mix of an entire math section, just so you're aware. It's not all the front questions, it's a big mix. And it's a mix of skills as well that we talked about, those bullet points. All right, so you got 15 minutes, ready, go. Count up how many your score in white. I got the number right. 5 and 5. Stacy scored a matches in gold.